my lovely little gemstones, it's Afira, and today I'll be reading When the Chips Are Down by Whiskey with Patron. Warnings for this chapter: there is a minor autistic shutdown that is due to sensory overload. Chapter 3. I almost have a panic attack in a Starbucks. Virgil held tight to Roman and Remus's hands as they walked down the driveway from the house. He had locked all the doors and windows before they left. It had taken a lot to get the twins to decide what to take with them and what to leave behind, so it had taken a little longer than Virgil hoped to get out of the house. While they were figuring their stuff out, Virgil had read over Dad's instructions multiple times until almost every word was engraved in his mind. He knew where they had to go, who he had to talk to, and what he had to say. He'd clamped his headphones over his ears so he didn't get overwhelmed, and it was easier to focus on his surroundings. He needed to keep a level head. He heard Roman say something. Virgil let go of Remus to move one side of his headphones. What was that? Is Dad going to be back soon? Roman asked. He stared up at Virgil with wide, pleading eyes. He could always make the cutest puppy dog eyes. Virgil blamed it on the drama lessons. I don't know, Virgil answered, but we will see him again. Can you text him? Remus asked. He paused in their walking to kick a pebble across the sidewalk. No, he said not to in his note, Virgil said. Sorry, Remus scowled and kicked a bigger rock into the street. His hair was still messy. He must not have taken the time to brush it. Remus's sadness over Dad's disappearance seemed to have turned to anger and frustration, as was often the case with him. Roman, however, was still pouting with tears in his eyes. He held Virgil's hand in an iron grip and didn't let go even as he almost tripped over his own feet. Where are we going? Roman asked. He wiped his face with his sleeve, leaving behind smudged tear tracks. We're going to see someone who will take care of us until Dad comes back, Virgil said. It's like having a babysitter, but for an unknown amount of time. We might be there for a few days, maybe even a few months, but Dad will come back. We just have to adjust until he does. What about drama practice? Roman squeaked. Of course he'd be worried about missing drama club. It was the only thing he and Remus got to do at the public school. He had friends there, and Roman loved socializing with other kids. You may have to miss it for today, buddy, Virgil said. He kept his head on a swivel as they rounded a corner onto another street. Don't worry, you can still go on Wednesday. I hope. Roman pouted harder and lowered his head. Virgil hated to burst Roman's bubble, but he wasn't about to lie to him. If Virgil got Roman's hopes up and it turned out that he couldn't go to drama practice on Wednesday, it would crush him. Virgil put his headphones back on properly and gazed longingly at the kids milling around outside the high school. He had never wanted to go to public school before, but right now, he would give almost anything to be one of those kids. At least they didn't have to worry about being babysat by a shady guy who ran some small bank. Yeah, Virgil had done a quick Google search for people named Janus Chimera before they left the house. Turns out that the guy Dad wanted Virgil to speak to ran a chain of banks around the southern end of the U.S. The nearest one was uptown, which was exactly where Dad had told him to go. It would take maybe an hour or so to walk there. Remus's leg would probably start hurting at some point during the walk. They would have to take breaks so he wouldn't have to push himself to keep walking, or Virgil could try and carry him. It would be best if they kept moving. Virgil didn't want to stay out in the open for too long. He took a deep breath as he passed by the school. Everything would be fine. He just had to follow Dad's instructions, and nothing would go wrong. Janus leaned back in his seat and glared at his computer. There were too many things to deal with today. There were people who had failed to pay off their debts, others who were begging Janus and his employees to smuggle them over a border, at least a dozen who had paid for a hitman, and there were drugs and weapons to be dealt and transported. Janus just couldn't keep track of it all. He'd been leaving voicemails and sending emails all morning as soon as DW left his office. He found himself staring blankly at an unfinished email he was writing to one of the organization's hitmen. Words failed him at the moment. There were too many things to do. He didn't know what to prioritize. The hitman, the drug trafficking, the weapons trafficking, smuggling paying customers over the borders of the U.S., kidnapping friends and relatives of those who hadn't paid off their loans to hold them ransom, directly interrogating those who still needed to repay him. The electric humming of the computer dragged his attention away from the task at hand. He rested his chin on his hands and listened to it whir. He shook his head. He needed to finish this email at least. He started typing, but the sounds of the keys clacking distracted him, and he found himself randomly pressing letters just to spam the backspace button so he could hear the keys. The screen glared at him, bright enough to almost hurt his eyes. His gaze flickered to all the dozens of things that littered his desk. His neon sticky notes, his phone, his pencil holder, the pens that he never bothered to put in the pencil holder, the mouse pad with a photo of the snake on it. He grunted in displeasure and leaned back. There were too many things going on. He couldn't focus on just one. Someone knocked on the door and he almost jumped out of his seat. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in his ears. Fucking hell, did someone really have to add another distraction to all the things already going on in his head? It's me, DW's voice said. Can I come in? Janus wanted to respond, but he just couldn't force words out of his mouth. Instead, he hit his palm on the top of his desk twice to signal a yes. The door opened and DW poked her head into the room. Hey, she said quietly. I can come back later if you're having issues. Janus motioned for her to come in. DW stepped through the door and shut it behind her. It's almost lunchtime, she said. You want to grab something to eat? Janus gestured vaguely to his screen, hoping it would convey what he wanted to say. I have too many things to do, and I need to accomplish at least one thing before I can take a break, or I'll just feel bad about procrastinating. Luckily, DW had been around him long enough to understand. I can help you finish what you're doing, and then you're going to take a break. Janus just nodded. It couldn't hurt to accept some help. DW walked to his side of the desk. He rolled his chair aside to give her some room. She leaned on the desk and looked at the screen. She started typing, and Janus just listened to her nails clacking on the keys and let himself zone out. It was frustrating that he couldn't even make himself write one more goddamn email, but some days were just like this. Hey, Jan, you might want to see this. Janus looked up at the too bright screen. DW must have finished and sent the email he'd been working on, because she'd ended up going through his inbox and clicking on something. On screen was an email. The text was all orange, which was a little more difficult to read on the white screen. The topic says, "Stop moving in," DW said. The rest of it is just vaguely threatening junk about us having people stationed downtown. Janus sighed. Chimera was already all over the southern half of the United States, and the shitty rival gang was hung up on them being on the other half of the city. It was ridiculous. However, he didn't know just how far Wrath's blade had stretched across the country. All he knew was that they were focused on drug dealing and smuggling, which was a business Janus was well versed in. It was no wonder they felt threatened by Janus's agents being present in that area. He would have stayed out of it completely, but Wrath's blade was also infamous for their human trafficking, and ever since Janus had started keeping tabs on Wrath's possible targets to ensure their safety, he'd made a very powerful enemy. Janus was many things, but he was not a person who tolerated immoral bullying and selling of innocent people. The new important focus in Janus's attention brought his senses down a little from their previously sensitive state. We'll have to be more covert, he managed to whisper as he scanned the screen. We're staying downtown? DW asked. Janus nodded. Lie to them. DW started typing up a response. Janus watched letters appear on screen as her fingers danced across the keys. Once she had written out a full reply, she glanced at Janus to see if he approved of what she wrote. He nodded and she clicked send. DW straightened and walked to the door. I'll run over to Starbucks and grab you a hot chocolate. We can go for a walk later if you're feeling better. Janus nodded again. DW shut the door behind her when she left. Janus took a deep breath, trying to focus on one task. Just one more email. He would write one last email, and then he'd take a break. Virgil struggled under Remus's weight as he walked. Remus's leg had started to hurt about 15 minutes into the walk, but he was too stubborn to take a break, so Virgil had offered to carry him. He had to admit, carrying an 11-year-old was a little more difficult than he thought it would be, but he didn't complain. They just needed to keep moving. He'd also taken off his headphones so he could hear if either of the twins needed anything, but it was difficult to block out all the sounds around them without his headphones. As soon as Remus was good to walk on his own again, Virgil would put them back on. Roman held on to Virgil's backpack as they continued down the sidewalk. Virg, he muttered, what if this guy's a jerk? What if he doesn't even take care of us? Then I'll take care of you, Virgil said. He shifted Remus on his hip. Well, then who will take care of you? Roman asked. I can take care of myself. Remus snorted. Yeah, 'cause you're old. Roman grinned and poked Virgil's arm. Ha! You're old. Virgil chose not to respond. He scanned the people around them on the street. No one looked familiar, but that didn't mean no one was following them. He kept an eye out for any familiar clothing, hairstyles, tattoos, anything that might have indicated that someone was tailing them. He'd been followed a few times in his life. It was second nature to look out for any possible danger. His gaze caught on a man walking along the other side of the street. He wore a denim jacket, which wasn't exactly uncommon, but there was an orange patch on his arm that Virgil could only just spot from this distance. Hadn't he seen a man a couple blocks back with a very similar jacket? Virgil tore his gaze away so he wouldn't look too obvious. His heart sped up as his anxiety presented him with dozens of possible outcomes to the situation, most of which involved possible kidnapping, death, or both. He looked up at the stores along the street. He needed to go somewhere public, with lots of people, where others would be watching him. He caught sight of a familiar sign on the street corner. A Starbucks. Perfect. He tugged Roman towards the store. What are we doing? Roman asked. Just making a quick stop, Virgil said. He slipped through the door as it began to close, pulling Roman after him. Virgil's anxiety didn't lessen when they entered the Starbucks. There were so many people around. Any one of them could have possibly been following them. And surely they would find a 15-year-old and two 11-year-olds wearing backpacks, entering a store without an adult suspicious. Virgil guided Roman over to a booth next to the one beside the door. He could see people through the window. They could see everyone who came in and out of the store, and anyone who came in wouldn't focus on them first. It was the safest spot. Virgil set Remus down on the seat. "You guys sit here. We're gonna take a short break. Not because of you, Ree," Virgil added when Remus's shoulder slumped. "Just so I can sort out my thoughts." Virgil slid into the opposite seat as Roman clambered up next to Remus. Virgil looked out the window to see if he could catch a glimpse of the man in the denim jacket with the patch on it. He was nowhere to be seen, but he had been on the other side of the street. Maybe he didn't notice them slip into the Starbucks. Or maybe he wasn't following them at all. Virgil chewed on his bat necklace as he watched the crowd outside. He mentally took note of some people's appearances, just to see if he could remember seeing them anywhere else. No one looked familiar. The door swung open and Virgil shot at a sideways glance. His heart leapt into his throat. A man walked in wearing a denim jacket with an orange patch on the sleeve. He quickly averted his eyes. This man was following them. He could get hostile if he was aware that Virgil knew he was trailing after them. He turned his eyes to the metal napkin holder, which was shiny enough to act as a decent mirror. He watched the man walk past their booth, and while he couldn't see the man's eyes, the slight turn of his head towards Virgil and the twins was enough to let him know that this man was here for them, not for a cup of coffee. Virgil's mind raced. What should he do? Order some coffee and tell the barista they were being followed? Leave the building as soon as the man's attention was directed elsewhere? Cause a distraction and tell Roman and Remus to run? He turned back to the window and watched the people pass by, desperately racking his brain for any kind of plan. He watched an old lady shamble past a younger man who might have been her son. Two women walked by, one of them pushing a stroller. A group of teenage girls piled into a small car and drove off. An expensive black car pulled up on the curb and parked in the girls' former spot. A tall black lady in a business suit left the car and walked up to the Starbucks door. Virgil watched as the lady entered the building. She walked with such a confident presence, it was hard to tear his eyes away from her. She was also very pretty. Not that he was into women at all. His gaze flickered to the man with the orange-patched jacket. He had a phone pressed to his ear, which only worsened Virgil's nerves. What if he was calling for backup to kidnap him and the twins? How were they supposed to get out of this one? He went back to watching the lady in the suit. She had approached the counter and was ordering her stuff, but she kept glancing around as if she expected someone to stab her in the back. Her gaze landed on the man with the orange patch. Recognition flashed across her face, but she covered it up in less than a second. Did this lady know that man? Was she following them too? "Remus?" Roman spoke up. "Is your leg better?" Remus scowled. "It's never gonna be better," he grumbled. "But is it feeling better right now?" Remus huffed. "Yeah, sorta. Virg, are we gonna go soon?" Virgil shot a glance at the man with the patch and the lady in the suit. Yeah, we'll get going in a bit." He locked eyes with the woman in the suit. His heart pounded like a bass drum and he turned his gaze to the ground. She was going to kidnap them, wasn't she? There was no way out of this. "Virgil, you're breathing weird again." Virgil's head snapped up to look at Roman. Both the twins were staring at him with identical expressions of concern. Virgil probably wasn't helping them feel safe when he was on the verge of a panic attack. "Are you okay, kid?" Virgil jumped at the voice and looked up to see the black woman in the suit standing next to their table. Her standing so close only heightened his anxiety. She was going to take him away now, wasn't she? She was going to kidnap him, and they would never see Dad again. She crouched next to the table so she wasn't towering over him. "Okay, kid, take deep breaths," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just breathe with me, okay? Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 7, out for 8. Can you do that?" Virgil wasn't comforted much by her statement that she wasn't going to hurt them, but he did as she instructed. Inhale, hold, exhale. Inhale, hold, exhale. After a third deep breath, his nerves eased up just enough so that he could look at the woman who approached their table. She looked concerned, but she offered him a slight smile when she saw that he wasn't quite panicking anymore. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. Virgil just nodded. This lady didn't give off any bad vibes, but he also knew firsthand that nice people could be bad. This could be a trap. The lady stood. She shot a glance at the man in the denim jacket and then back to Virgil. "Sorry to pry, kid," she said quietly. "But are you being followed?" Virgil swallowed. Roman and Remus stared at him with wide eyes, waiting for an answer. Virgil nodded. "Is it the guy in the denim with the patch?" she asked. Virgil gave another nod. The lady heaved a light sigh. "I'll take care of him. You three get out of here. You'll be safer once you're further uptown." Virgil furrowed his brow in concern as she turned and strode towards the man with the orange patch. However, he didn't protest. He slid out of the booth and shouldered his backpack. "Come on," he said to Roman and Remus. "We should get going." The twins scurried after him. They hurried to the door and squeezed through behind an old guy in a plaid shirt. As soon as they were outside, Virgil grabbed Roman and Remus's hands and rushed down the sidewalk, heart pounding. He didn't know who that lady was or why she helped them, but if he ever saw her again, he owed her a favor. It didn't take long to disappear into the crowd of pedestrians and get out of sight of the Starbucks. Virgil finally let himself relax a little. He slowed his pace. "Virgil," Remus said, "why were we being followed?" Virgil didn't have an answer for that. "I don't know." "Who was that lady?" Roman asked. Virgil glanced back at the direction the Starbucks had been in. "I don't know." Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you like what you hear and you want to read more, you can find the link to the fic and the author in the description. If you want to check out other podfics I've done, you can click on the playlist linked on the screen. See you next time!